But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised that Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
And I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by Dr. Chris Wilson, who is the co-founder and director of Hate and Extremism Insights Aotearoa, as well as a lecturer in politics and international studies at the University of Auckland. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
No worries. Nice to be here.
Chris, you've recently revealed some very interesting research about Brenton Tarrant, the Australian killer who travelled to New Zealand and committed atrocities in mosques in Christchurch. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to look at Brenton Tarrant's online footprint?
Our starting point was that the Royal Commission found that he hadn't visited far-right websites. This is what the terrorists told them, the commissioners, and that's what they obviously spoke to security agencies and others, and they agreed with that claim, and that was their conclusion. It seemed a bit strange to us because his final post and his statement went to 8chan, but we know, and the Royal Commission knew from his planning document that it was meant to go to 4chan as well. And the way that he spoke on that in that last message was that quite a bit of familiarity and camaraderie with that community. We know from other people who have committed violence, particularly since his attack, that the chan's incredibly important for them. So there were a few things that just didn't seem to add up. So we wanted to go and have a look at 4chan in particular and see if we could find them.
I seem to recall on the day, the commentary from other posters was when it was revealed that it was an Australian, they were like, oh, well, it was him. It was that guy that we know. So yeah. It does seem strange that they took at face value that he was just on YouTube.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That is exactly. There's quite a few reasons why it was a little bit of a strange conclusion. There's been quite a few in this research. We've realised that actually what he said, his manifesto, his statements when he was arrested, and to the Royal Commission and so on, really have to be taken with a grain of salt. So it really is just part of the propaganda of the deed. His statements as well as he's trying to get that message out. So we have to be a little bit careful about just taking what he says at face value. So yeah, the good thing about what we have been able to find, if we can, you say it was good, but is to be able to find him speaking candidly and not knowing that he was speaking to his peers, like-minded peers, and speaking candidly and being himself, right? So, it gives us a lot more insight into what he was thinking, why he did, what he was hoping to achieve, his prejudices and his hatreds and so on, without that kind of cloak of propaganda that was in his manifesto. And there's quite a few differences that we've come across.
Chris, why do you think that this was not disclosed? Why would someone like that want to deny that they were present on sites like 4chan and so on?
Yeah, that's a question that we've asked ourselves and tried to think about. I think the community, and this is in a paper we're writing now, is the community was incredibly important to him. So these are just kind of hypotheses, if you like, or assumptions or guesses that potentially he was trying to protect it. Potentially it's really difficult to answer. It might also be part of the whole shit posting and red herrings and trying to fool people afterwards, and which of course the 4chan community would find hilarious. So it's, speaking back to that community in different ways, it's really difficult to know. But, just like I say, he made it really clear in what he did and where he posted his messages that this was important to him. So, yeah, we haven't worked out yet why he tried to fool people afterwards. But this is probably another, probably quite even more compelling explanation, is that the way that he spoke on 4chan revealed him to be somebody who wasn't the person that he was trying to present through his propaganda. He wasn't quite the upstanding person who was doing it as a last resort, because in his manifesto he talks about that in 2017 he changed his mind and he realized that a political solution was no longer possible. Actually, as we've revealed in our conversation pieces, 2 years before that he'd been talking about this exact type of attack and showing his hatreds and his prejudices and his legitimation of violence. And he's incredibly racist. He's incredibly anti-Semitic. Has a whole lot of prejudices and also quite a few sad aspects to his personality and his life. And he kind of lived in almost a fantastical type world. Some of the threads that we've come across and we've discussed on the conversation pieces show him to be a bit of a fantasist. So there may be a sense of embarrassment, and he probably didn't want these posts uncovered. So that may be an explanation.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you uncovered the posts? It seems in the conversation pieces that you refer to how easy it was, but it also seems like it might have been a little bit tricky.
Yeah, easy in the sense that it was manual. We had a team of 4 of us. After we got ethics approval from the university in early to mid-January, we started on it and we worked pretty intensively on it, my team. So it involved manual labor, if you like, I guess, looking for it. But we had a bunch of, so in that way it's kind of easy because we're not using AI or anything particularly sophisticated, which of course raises this question of why wasn't it found before and why did it take us to do it, which we can get to if you like later. But to do it, of course, the easy thing for us is that we have hindsight and we have a whole lot of his writing, including the manifesto at the time of the attack and stuff that he submitted before he travelled and what I believe is a period before he radicalised, really. So we've got a whole lot of examples of the way that he writes and the language that he uses and strange grammatical and linguistic styles that he uses that we were able to then use to try and identify him. That's a thing. That hindsight is not something that was present before the attack. So in that sense, the security agencies had it a lot more. It was a lot tougher for them. The other thing, so there's a number of ways that we found him, and we had to rely on a combination of several of them to be present before we would actually be able to say in our research this is him. So there's a bunch of stuff that is almost certainly him, but we haven't included it because it doesn't reach this threshold of having a number of indicators. The second indicator, along with his language, was that we know where he was. And strangely, and this is a little bit of a unique case, that he had that money, so he was able to travel and move from country to country over a number of years. So he was in quite strange places at particular moments, but speaking the way that he always did, no matter where he was. So there were much smaller numbers in particular countries that he was visiting. So it was much easier so then we were able to go, yep, 4chan identifies the location of the poster and that matches his travel. And then he had a whole lot so he was white nationalist, obviously, which doesn't particularly narrow it down on 4chan, but he had a whole lot of different terms related to white nationalist ideology and ways of speaking, and even things that he would repeat elsewhere in more public forums, like that you guys will be aware of, and Facebook groups and so on. He would say the same things in some of the posts, so we were able to go, yep, that's another indicator. And then one of the key things that we've found is that, unsurprisingly, these guys like him like to be somebody, right? So he self-identifies quite frequently. Says he's Australian, says he's from Grafton, gives a whole lot of other information that we know from, the accumulation of knowledge about him since the attack, that we were able to go, well, yeah, that's him self-identifying in addition to a bunch of those other things. So we put all those together and we're pretty rigorous and we're able to say, yeah, that's him.
I guess just on that question of why has nobody else found it? Why do you think that perhaps the security agencies hadn't found this content?
I don't know, so I can only guess. Obviously, the first guess is did they know and just not tell anybody? But I find that hard to believe. At least going through the Royal Commission and so on, I can't imagine that they would have done that. So I could only conclude that they didn't know up until around that point. Royal Commission came out in 2020. So why did they not know? The only, one guess that I would make would be that they didn't realise the importance of somewhere like 4chan, particularly the poll board, to these people, how important they are. That's where they hang out, and also these boards are really important in radicalizing them. And then, who knows, just guessing, but other expertise or insights, so on, that maybe meant that they didn't know how to look, if they had known where to look and didn't know exactly how to look, having that analysis. And then, it's really something that was, it was pretty astounding when we found what we've found, and then to be going, how is this not known until now? So yeah, strange.
Chris, in terms of his online publications, I know you weren't engaged in a comparative study, but was there anything about his contributions to 4chan that distinguished it from what I imagine a lot of similar posts? And secondly, was there any kind of real distinction? I know you've commented on this, but in terms of what he was publishing on Facebook in various groups and pages and so on, and the kinds of things he was publishing on the Chans.
So two questions, and then the first one is really something that we've been thinking a lot about, because this is the whole needle in the haystack question, right? How, if there's lots of people out there talking like this, then how can we distinguish them? Which is part of the reason we're doing this study, is not so much to cast aspersions or blame on whoever didn't notice it beforehand, but to use this language to be able to identify those individuals who will go on and do something like what happened in Christchurch. And it is really difficult, but if you now, with our benefit of hindsight and identifying him, you do start to look at it and go, it is a little bit different. Like, the way he speaks is different, even in that forum of the poll board, where everybody, most people are pretty extreme, most people are violent, most people are super racist and have a whole lot of quite similar opinions. Even within that kind of environment, you do start to notice that there are some differences. He was more violent, more placing himself at the heart of the movement and the need for violence, talking about plans which other people don't do, that these are things that we've mentioned in the conversation pieces and we'll mention in our upcoming academic articles. Just a little bit more intensity, if you like. It's hard, like this, our analysis is not complete in this sense, so I'll be able to articulate it better in the future, but there's definitely something a little bit different about him, even to the extent where fellow posters would often say, what is the matter with you? Why don't you calm down? Why are you so angry? Why are you so violent? So even in that environment, it's, he did kind of stick out a little bit. And so really interestingly, his voice changed. The way he writes changes depending on the platform he uses. So he goes, because we know of quite a few different platforms that a lot of this was reported in the Royal Commission report, buying and selling weapons, talking about weapons in different forums, talking about travel, all of those things. And then, of course, the UPF and Lad Society Facebook pages, which have been discussed, some of which examples have been given. There's quite a variety of different voices in the way that he speaks, which is potentially is obviously an intentional thing. He chooses the way he speaks depending on the audience that's going to be listening, and the way that obviously it's going to resonate with the people he's interacting with. So the way he spoke on poll is very, very different to the way he spoke in other places. Seems like a very different person. You read him there, which is quite violent and explicit in its language, and then go somewhere else and it's much more run-of-the-mill. The UPF and Lad Society one's Facebook pages and talking about, the Day of the Rope and posts like that, which are all public, and this is not from our research, but is a little bit closer to his language on 4chan, but still not quite as extreme. So there's a bit of a spectrum, I guess. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it also makes it more difficult for security agencies or anybody who's trying to identify and monitor and detect this kind of language and hopefully prevent another attack, is that they potentially, if other people are like him, which almost certainly some will be, if they're heading along a similar sort of pathway, that they will speak quite differently in different places. So it makes it a little bit more difficult, but it's also something that we can potentially use.
Chris, could you speak a little bit about, I guess, specifically what you did find in the posts and what it changes about our understanding of his timeline of radicalisation? And
so it started much earlier than the Royal Commission found. They always left open that there might be more information, and it might have been earlier. But we found in 2015, at the time of the Dylan Roof attack in Charleston, his views on violence, who should be attacked, where they should be attacked, were pretty much exactly the same as they were in March 2019. So he was already radicalized to at least believing violence was legitimate and necessary to generate a race war. That's what, in terms of real world outcomes, that's what his goal was, at least to generate some sort of segregation, race war, segregation, and so on. So that's quite a lot earlier than had initially been recognised. Over the following 4 years, his views varied a bit. They were pretty much in place, obviously, by that point, but they became more concrete and heading towards. They went through in an upcoming paper. We talk about these different kind of phases from that point, where he was getting closer towards the attack, where it was becoming more concrete. I think we think that obviously there's going to be offline events that influenced his thinking and his planning. The Bissonnette attack in Quebec, various other things. He claims that it was the defeat of Marine Le Pen in France and the death of Ebba Ekelund. We cast some doubt on his claims in the manifesto like that, but there were some offline events that probably helped him push him along that pathway. But the poll board on 4chan was super crucial in it, keeping him on that path, changing his idea of who should be attacked, and for a few other dynamics, making him feel like he was the person who should do it. So yeah, it changed. It was set by 2015. Well, his legitimation of violence was set by 2015, and his plans started to become more concrete in his mind, and then it started to be put into place later in 2018. Settled in New Zealand, obviously. Wrote to Bruce Rifle Club in January 2017, around the time that he was also donating to far-right websites, also around the time that we've written about this in our second conversation piece so we're talking about it the same week, also talking about engaging in ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. And then that same week he wrote to Bruce Rifle Club in New Zealand, in Dunedin, and said, "Are you still open?" Thinking about joining or thinking about moving down there, and then came to New Zealand later that year in late 2017. And then we've seen no evidence that his plans were to attack mosques at that point, but then started to talk about it in 2018. So definitely was pretty much coming to. I know that he made similar points about mosques and Islamic schools in, I think, was it a Lad Society Facebook page. So some of those very similar statements are made on poll in 2018. So he was getting his plans ready by that stage.
Chris, the 5th anniversary of the attacks has just passed. You were in Australia at the time. What did you make of the Australian media coverage of the anniversary?
Yeah, it's non-existent. I probably shouldn't say it was non-existent, but I didn't see any, and I didn't hear any on the radio or TV or in print, and I couldn't really understand why. I couldn't understand why, because he's Australian. He wasn't a New Zealander. He was Australian. He was a product of Australia, not just of Australia. He travelled, and there was a whole lot of different things that radicalised him, but he was an Australian. Even more so that before the 5th anniversary, we've released a whole lot of information that demonstrated that he not only was he Australian, but he was very proud and open about his Australian identity, and he posted quite frequently about it, even at one point posting a photo of his Australian passport and saying that the Australian government could do nothing to stop him. This was talking about ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, if I'm remembering correctly. So and around the time that he was doing a number of other things around, like I mentioned before. So there was very open about his Australian identity, a product of Australia, and so it's potentially a product of the political environment in Australia as he was growing up, and some of the rhetoric that was prevalent over those years. And on top of that, there were most of the indicators. I've pointed out that potentially it's a needle in a haystack, but the needle was potentially at the top of the haystack while he was in New Zealand. He spoke about his plans. Well, in the years before that, he was speaking very much about being Australian, wanting to engage in ethnic violence. So there were a number of and doing a number of other offline and contacting different people, donating money while being clear about his Australian identity. So there were a number of pieces that potentially we would like our security agencies to put together, pieces of the puzzle, and be able to identify somebody like that.
Why do you think it's important for Australians in particular, I suppose, given that the killer was Australian, to remember what happened? And how do you think that the research you're conducting at the moment might assist Australians, but also others, obviously, in understanding the importance of these sorts of figures and the context from which they emerge?
Yeah. I mean, surely it's important for Australia and Australians that somebody like him would come out of the Australian system, politics, schooling, society, and have those kind of views and go on to conduct an attack. So it's I think it's pretty important that it should be important for Australia and Australians to reflect on that and to think what went wrong there. And of course, this is not a one-off thing. I've made the point in one of the conversation pieces that anybody who thinks that this is a one-off and this was an extreme one-off event it's ill-advised. It's not. The same processes haven't really changed. The same ideas are still there. The same racist notions and ideas about different groups and violence and so on are still there in Australia, just as they are in many countries. And then the same online environment in which a lot of Australians find a home, pretty much, because they don't feel at home elsewhere in society. And an Australian identity is a real thing on places like on the pole board and 4chan. The Australian identity of being a little bit crazy and a little bit wild. That's a real kind of go-to marker of almost of status on those forums. So it's important for Australia to reflect on that and to ideally be able to start to chip away at the things that cause those kind of pathways. The stuff that we're finding hopefully is going to be able to play some role in being able to identify what radicalizes these individuals, the kind of conversations that they have and they seek out, and the interactions that they have that seem to energize them and also annoy them and push them more towards violence. So the language they use, the types of where they engage in these types of conversations, and then also the kind of, is it echo chamber and groupthink, or is it more of an interaction that drives people along these pathways? These are the more detailed information that we've got in this sense of the way that they interact with their online communities and the importance of those online communities to these people, and then be able to map that against what's happening in their offline lives and the type of things that they might be doing that indicate they are heading towards an attack. The more in-depth information and case studies that we've got like this, the more we are not so much operating in the dark anymore and hopefully we can put together a more comprehensive and accurate picture of the way that these people act in the years leading up to an attack. So that's our hope anyway.
You mentioned that a number of people find a home online in various places, but of course including 4chan and Poll, and there is a distinct, I guess, Australian presence on boards like that. But I'm wondering if there's any sense in which, in your research, you account for the kind of humour that's used on these sites, because in the few postings I've read that were produced by him and others, there's a kind of, along with the calls to violence and to racist violence, there's often included within it or embedded within it some kind of nod and a wink, a kind of somewhat implausible deniability that places distance between the content that's being produced and the person who's producing it, in the sense that this is, an ironic act or an act or a statement not to be taken too seriously. I'm wondering if you can say anything about the ways in which humour or irony is employed in these contexts and by the killer as well.
Yeah, it's super important, actually. It's super important because it makes it enjoyable for people. It makes them feel at home. This is something that they can do. This is humor that, a lot of people who don't find a home anywhere else or don't excel at something else, this is all of a sudden they're excelling at a type of humor. And, it's kind of a new thing for a bunch of different people. The humor makes it kind of, there's that plausible deniability, but that kind of initially unclear what it is that people are looking at, which takes away that initial kind of confrontational impact, I guess. And so therefore kind of dulls the impact of it a little bit, but then there's that humor and that people spread it, and it becomes just like an enjoyable interaction where people are seeking it out. You want to go back and look at it, like it's visually appealing and it's humorous. It's something that you can do and you can participate in. You actually feel like a bit of a leader and a content creator. But all the while, it's inculcating, disseminating these ideas which are at the heart of far-right, neo-Nazi, white nationalist ideology. It's all the same ideas. It's just being presented in a different format. And that different format is far more effective at spreading those ideas than any of the old formal modes of indoctrination and lectures and ideologues sitting people down and teaching them the old texts and so on. And we're writing this in a paper now. We're going to make the case this is actually makes it far more dangerous. It creates a much bigger constituency among very young, impressionable young people, and makes these ideas spread in a much more faster and a more effective way. So it's actually, while I think a lot of us lean towards going, well, this is it's actually only semi-serious. It's actually kind of ironic, and they're not actually being serious. And so you start to think that, one, it's not that dangerous, and two, that the ideologies, these old hardline ideologies, are not that important in it. Actually, it's the opposite to our minds. What we're arguing is that it's actually far more dangerous, and those ideas are spreading much more widely and much faster, and among a very different audience who are more prone to accepting them. And at the same time, and all these things are linked, is that these people who are enjoying this type of media, if you like, and these jokes and memes and so on, at the same time, and believing that they are quite good at doing it, and they are. Like, there's no doubt that Pol is kind of a world leader in this domain, that at the same time these people feel disenfranchised and marginalized, well, at least they present themselves as that, from broader society. And this is the home that they've found. And just like any subculture that feels like it's kind of disenfranchised and excluded from broader society, they take a pride in that. They get a sense that they are part of something that's, it's us and them. And those dynamics, a whole lot of these dynamics that I've kind of spoken about today, all are pushing a lot of people along a pathway of radicalization, and some people go all the way and start thinking about violence, even committing violence. So the forms of media, the language, the irony, the memes, all of that is pretty important.
Chris, just finally, you mentioned before that there were various puzzle pieces that were out there that needed to be put together to identify Tarrant. Part of the problem, of course, is that prior to 2019, the white nationalist far-right puzzle was one that maybe wasn't actually being looked at. It was at the back of the closet. It wasn't taken seriously. Do you think that now that has changed, could those puzzle pieces potentially be put together today?
It's tricky to say, really, just because I'm not within the security, talking about the work of the security agencies. I'm not privy to what their tools and their methods and the information that they have. So it's really tricky for me to say. I think the focus is much, compared to before March 15th, 2019, there's a much bigger focus on the far right, broadly speaking, and other white nationalist risks of violence. I think that balance with other forms of extremism has probably been evened out. And obviously it's very tricky for the agencies to know where the next threat is going to come from. So so obviously that's going to help. The key for me, I think, is that if in an ideal world, one person or one team would be looking at a whole lot of different things, right? It's a whole of society approach that's needed for detection of these things, because it's really only looking at somebody speaking online. Yes, that's a worry. It's really when you map it against, like as we did in our conversation piece, where you map it against, like one day he's talking about ethnic cleansing, the next day he's buying automatic weapons, and then the next day under a white nationalist slogan, right? Which you've probably seen that we've written about that, and was mentioned in the Royal Commission report. So there's a bunch of different online, and then some other online platform, and then does something offline. Ideally, in terms of the puzzle pieces that need to be put together, it's a real whole of society, online, offline, be able to detect that, which is, it's hard for me to say whether understanding that needs to be done is, has been reached by the people who need to be looking and doing that work. It's really hard for me to say because nobody really speaks to me about, well, especially since we released this work, nobody's really spoken to us about it or sought to engage on it and see what improvements could be made from the knowledge that we are gaining. So it's hard to say, but that's the kind of all of, the big picture kind of thing that's going to be required to know which is the needle in the haystack and which is the individual who's looking like they are about to commit another atrocity like that.
Well, Chris, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. If people want to read more of the work, heiaglobal.com, and people can also find you on x.com at Chris_Wilson. Thanks for coming on.
No, it was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Well, Andy, that's our show. We'll be back next week.
We'll speak to you then.
Every year, Wildlife Victoria receives tens of thousands of calls reporting sick, injured or orphaned wildlife. The biggest reason? Road accidents. If you're driving and hit a native animal or see an animal injured by the side of the road, call Wildlife Victoria's Emergency Response Service on 03 84 00 7300. And remember to slow down, especially between dusk and dawn. Wildlife Victoria is a 3CR supporter.
Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now. The Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Time's on my mind when I had you by my side. Am I thinking loud? Do I want you around?
3CR's Trans Day of Audibility returns for its third year running in 2024. Listen up as Community Radio's foremost gendermongers bring you all the very best of transgender lives, loves, culture and politics.
Tapestry. Tally up the same.
12 to 4 p.m, March 31st, Easter Sunday.
When your dreams come true, they feel distressingly alive.
3CR's Trans Day of Audibility. Tune in on AM, digital or online, or join us in person at 21 Smith Street, Fitzroy for live performances and friends.
Story where nobody has a pulse but me.